Windows on the World live every Sunday, 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Join me, Mark Windows, and Tony Hurst. Join the conversation in our chat box and also catch up with life-changing information on our continuous program stream at windowsontheworld.net.
6th day of December 2017, allegedly, according to that thing we call a calendar. And this indeed is the Chelli Effect, broadcast live from the facilities of Chelli.com. Also heard on windowsontheworld.net, our friends at reallibertymedia.com via the Chuck Chelli channel, and, of course, Awake Radio US and other affiliates who, as of yet, have not followed through on the procedure to get themselves listed with the website so they don't get a mention. Anyway, it is what it is, and it is definitely a Wednesday, and we're getting our once-a-month visit. I'll tell you, we could make a lot of jokes out of that. But anyway, our once-a-month visit from Mark Windows in the first hour, windowsontheworld.net. That is his website, and he is an interesting fellow for sure, and the guy that I rely on to get my viewpoints about what is actually happening, in real people's heads over there in what another friend of mine calls Camp UK. In the second hour, we'll have Aaron Franz from the Age of Transitions with us, and you know that conversation is not predictable in any way, shape, or form. But then again, Mark Windows in his own right is not very predictable. Let's begin by first asking Mark how he's doing. How you doing tonight, Mark?
I'm pretty good, Chuck. Yeah, good to hear you again.
It seems like it's been a while, I tell you, longer than a month, but I don't think it has. It's actually maybe been a little less. But either way, time is irrelevant. What is relevant is the strange world we find ourselves in. And, of course, you provide a lot of interesting viewpoints about that world and break down things, the actual realities that go on through not only windowsontheworld.net, but of course you have a YouTube channel for as long as YouTube and the GooTube people will allow you to have it. That's for sure. But anyway, I definitely advise people to go to windowsontheworld.net, which does sound quite a bit like a restaurant that used to be on the top of a tall structure. But no, it is the .net site. Go there, and that's where you find Mark's work. Anyway, Mark, let's kick it off. Let's kick it off righteously today and ask about how it is, in American media, my friend, in American mainstream media for sure. There is, and I haven't even checked with the alternate streams yet because I don't have the stomach for it at this point. But in the mainstream, I've been already confronted with the hand-wringing, the absolute freaking out over, the United States, Donald Trump himself has decided to recognize the capital of Israel as the capital of Israel and approved the moving of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And, hey, our allies are not pleased, and they show us pictures of Miss May over there, and they show us pictures of members of parliament. They don't play the sound, but they tell us that they're quite angry, and they tell us that those in Europe who are our allies, our longest-standing allies, in fact, which, of course, those of you in Camp UK would be considered probably our, not our longest standing allies, because that might be the French. But anyway, another subject. The thing is that when it comes to England and England's government, allegedly, they're supposed to be our great allies, and they're supposed to be upset, and the English people are not thrilled with us, and so on and so forth. And how about we cut to the chase and get to the reality? Mark, what's your view on this?
Well, I think Miss May is being told what to do by her friends of Israel anyway. And the first thing she did when she got into number 10 was go and visit the chief rabbi. So I think she's well under foreign occupation, shall we say. She's under the occupation of the greatest democracy, or the only democracy in the Middle East, Chuck, I believe.
Oh, is that what they still call it? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Well, democracy. Well, let's not even begin to dissect that word because we've only got 1 hour, Mark. But,
correct.
The thing is that when we look at this, the orders that are being given to the different governments, well, gee, are you one of those people who's just, all about the Zionist conspiracy? Well, not on every single level that some people are obsessed with it, but it's difficult to deny reality when I know for a fact that each one of the alleged presidential candidates during the selection.
Yeah, over here, it's difficult to deny facts, but most people seem to be trying to do it.
Ah, okay. Well, I see that here too. But the thing is, like I said, with the presidents, when they're running, right, for the selection, I didn't say election, I said selection. When they're running for the selection process, they all have to go in front of this organization called AIPAC, and they all have to plead their case about how they are going to be a positive force for Israel. But, you know, the interests of Israel and the United States might not necessarily be the same thing. Now, understand, people, I view the state of Israel, and I don't want to talk about the biblical history or that which your preachers tell you from the pulpit, or the fact that, you know, any good Christian is supposed to at all times defend Israel. No, I'm telling you about the modern day criminal state of Israel that literally, in my estimation, participates in genocidal activity in the world's largest open air concentration camp.
Well, actually, Chuck, I've been to the West Bank, so I do know what I'm talking about. It was quite a few years ago, but I've seen what goes on there. And yes, it wouldn't be allowed to happen anywhere else. If it happened anywhere else in the world, there'd be an absolute outcry. We hear about Yemen, and we hear about what's going on there. And, of course, the US and our good selves here have been very involved in the destruction of that country for a long time. So the actual attacks on that place are well documented. But having actually been there to the West Bank, to these places that get talked about a lot, I have seen what goes on there.
Well, this is an interesting thing. I mean, as somebody who hasn't been there, I do note that even the Israeli government will tell you that, yes, indeed, Palestinian terrorists might have killed 3 citizens of Israel allegedly during a missile attack, but our response is to kill 300 of theirs, and usually with things like bulldozers and whatever else going through their particular areas where they're living, doesn't matter. Plus other things I've seen where, you know, they're firing all sorts of interesting viscous liquids all over the border fence and things like this. And yes, indeed, I don't think there would be another place in the world where an entire population could be victimized by another population without people screaming that there is the need for interventions. There is the need for what is the UN doing about this? Oh, God, let's not start on the UN again. Only 1 hour. But I mean, you know, here we go. No outcry. As a matter of fact, we're supposed to defend them. They're our greatest ally in the Middle East, like you said, the only democracy there, the only government we can recognize. But
well, I think there's another point here, Chuck, that old Bibi there, who's losing his marbles by the day, has stated that he wants to take on Iran on his own. Well, let's see him try that one.
I actually had to sit and breathe for a moment.
Well, I didn't mean literally on his own. I mean the state of Israel.
Well, no, I get it. But either way, it's still a pretty interesting idea. You know, Iran, for the fact that most people don't understand this, is a modernized country, is fairly well developed, has a military which is formidable, is not somebody to really play with. Now, I don't think that Israel, despite the fact that they do have the Mossad and these various other, you know, commando organizations and all that kind of stuff, I'm not sure.
I think you mean G4 security, don't you?
Oh, I do. And others, right?
Oh, yes.
Ooh, but that's the thing, is that we have to go with and others, because quite honestly, we're constantly discovering the different intelligence groups that they have over there. It's pretty intricate. But
well, it's pretty intricate over here, Chuck, I can tell you that, because even with the NGOs that are linked in with the Israeli lobbyists, they are controlling both sides here. And the thing is that all of this subterfuge that goes on, and the fact we're not meant to mention it, tells you everything you need to know, because it's the most obvious thing in the British government to the people who are actually involved in it. Nobody escapes the Israeli lobby in this country, and they lobby these hate groups, which are basically fomenting hatred against people that they don't like, calling them right-wing and racist and anti-Semitic and whatever else they want to call them. And there's never any basis for it. But funnily enough, we've had the weekly accusation of anti-Semitism against Jeremy Corbyn. So I thought we were going to get let off this week, but we're not, you see. It has to go in every week.
Well, there's got to be that. I mean, look, And Corbyn's an interesting guy, and I'm somebody outside of the, no dog in the fight, right? He's an interesting guy. I certainly don't think that he's now listen, this is just to the outsider's point of view. I don't think that he's the best of all possible worlds, but the guy seems to be thinking a little more straightforward than these other people that seem to be bought and paid for. Now,
I think you've got it right there, Chuck. He does actually think before he speaks, which is very, very rare. Now, I know his brother very well, Piers, and Piers and his brother, they come from the old-fashioned left. They come from a time when it was all elbow patches, righteousness, and let's squat that building. It'll be the right thing to do. We're going to help the people who are really in need. So they came from quite a good place in a way. Now, the thing is, what's very interesting is that the old-fashioned left has been usurped by New Labour, which is basically the same agenda as the Tory party. So there is no right and left anymore. There's just right and wrong. And the reason that Corbyn actually got so much attention and was able to capture the public imagination is because the public were, to put it very simply, absolutely sick of being patronised and lied to.
Well, and it's funny that you make exactly this observation about what's happening there, because I'm screaming over here that people are complaining about the left, and I say, where is it? Because there is no legitimate left.
No, no.
Even the alleged parties. Now, I don't know if you know this, but at the beginning of last month, we were supposed to see a left-wing uprising in this country, right? It was supposed to be planned. It was going to be in many major American cities. Prepare yourselves, patriots, because the left is going to rise up and be unified.
Chuck, the school holiday's finished.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, there's that. But the funny thing is, this was supposed to be the 4th of November, so school should have still been in session.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, sorry, I'm not keeping up with your calendar there, am I?
Yeah, but there you go. But I'm saying, well, now we have, listen, it's getting too cold for a revolution, so these people are not coming out. But the thing is, it doesn't matter which side they're supposed to be on. What I'm saying is that there was supposed to be this unified left, and it doesn't exist. It was proven on that day because nobody showed up for these massive protests or anything else. What we have is a right wing, a confused opposition, which opposes the right wing for other idiotic reasons, and thinks that the idea is that if you don't like what's happening, you're supposed to support their alleged political opposition.
Well, Chuck, I just wanted to stop you there because this is a very important point. I'll tell you why. Because ex-members, I kid you not, of the Communist Party in this country, such as people who are associated with the Corbyns in the 60s and 70s and 80s, are now labelled ultra-right-wing, and they are being accused of inciting hatred. So the whole thing is absolutely ridiculous. But we have to remember that Soros is holding the purse strings here. And we can look at some of the absolutely absurd statements that these groups make. I mean, I was actually going to get to it at one point because we've been discussing this week on the shows the George Soros funded and Saul Alinsky inspired groups, because you can't get away from them. And I know it's the same in the States. It's the same here. This is absolutely an absurd situation. It's the post-truth world. It's people without a brain cell who can only engage in ad hominems, and they call you a fascist. So what we did, Chuck, we did a show about fascism and cultural Marxism. And it's really interesting because the Antifa idea of fascism is nothing like what fascism actually is. In fact, compared to what Antifa want, fascism is a really good idea. We actually did a show about it. So when these people call you a fascist, they can't even define what they mean. Then they use Nazi, then they use racist. So the tactics are extremely limited. And these people are incapable of debate, and that is why we're living in a post-truth world.
Well, listen, if you ever need to do a part 2, I would be more than happy to come on and talk to you about the most recognizable fascist figure that they often reference without knowing anything about the history, which is Benito Mussolini. And Mussolini, he brought the Italians together as a nation, is what he did. Now, look, he had an idea about advancing the culture and about advancing the people, and there was that problem.
I'll tell you why Antifa don't like him, Chuck. Because I've got Mussolini's definition of fascism right in front of me. Now, this is from Mussolini, who you're just talking about. It states, fascism denies that the majority, by the simple fact that it is a majority, can direct human society. Well, that's the opposite of what Antifa want, right? They openly say they want a new world order. That's actually on Torch Antifa's website, that they want to come together and form a new world order. Now, I wonder if there's anyone pulling the strings there, Chuck. However, it carries on. And it said, it denies that numbers alone can govern by means of a periodical consultation. And it affirms the immutable, beneficial and fruitful inequality of mankind. Now, that's actually a good thing, because it means that they would take away all this Agenda 2030 and Common Core rubbish, which assumes everyone's going to be in a crap job and everyone's going to be living on the poverty line. So it assumes that people have different vocations. So it's actually quite interesting when you look at they're actually having a go at people and they don't even know what the definition. And if you go to these sort of refuse fascism websites, it says about fascism, it says fascism is not just a gross combination of horrific reactionary policies. No, it's not. That's correct. It is a qualitative change in how society is governed. Fascism ferments and relies on xenophobia, nationalism, racism, misogyny, and the aggressive reinstitution of oppressive traditional values. They've let themselves down a bit with traditional values. Yes, that would be a thing, because fascism was about the embracing of culture and art, and also women, the empowerment of women. So Antifa wouldn't really want to hear that, would it? It'd go a bit wrong.
Well, and it is nationalist also. I mean, it does have a national focus. Yes. I mean, let's be honest about it, right? I mean, it does have a national focus. It can be viewed as xenophobic.
Yes, but that's not xenophobic, is it? Nationalism is not xenophobia, and that's what we suffer from in this country. We have these agitation groups like Britain First and the English... I was going to call them English Defamation League, actually, because that's basically what they are.
Pretty close, yeah.
They work for the same people. English Defence League, and this Tommy Robinson, and they're basically all funded by the same lobbying groups that we've been talking about. They're all funded by them, and all they're there for is to create ferment and division and get useful idiots on the British side to start attacking Muslims for external interests. That's what they're there for. And they're being exposed for it now.
Well, you know what's funny about that? I don't know if you kept up with it, but of course, in the past week or so, Donald Trump, right, is out there retweeting the Britain First stuff.
I think he probably just thought it was a good idea. Yeah, Britain First, that sounds good. And I can actually see it as quite comedic in a way, because I really don't think he knew what he was doing. He thought, Britain First, yeah, America First, Britain First. We are allies, good idea.
Right. Yeah. You know what? I think you have just nailed it. You have
That's what he did. Yeah.
In 10 seconds laid out exactly what happened, and the American media had wrestled with it for days and days.
Well, about what does this mean? On trivia show. Yeah.
Well, they have to concentrate on trivia because, quite honestly, there is palatable proof that this guy, you know, whether he knew it or not, allowed his surrogates to make deals with foreign nations to try and get dirt on his political opponents. And he did it so obviously. It's not like other politicians don't do it here, but he did it so obviously that maybe he doesn't even need to stay in office. Now, is he going to be removed? Of course not, because the majority of his party controls things at the moment. They made an attempt. This has not really been put out in the news today, but they made an attempt to impeach him today, which is laughable because,
yeah.
You know, it was like, I mean, I'm very sure that some of the people who participated in that meant that they might actually make a difference and thought that they could get enough attention for the next time around. Maybe we show we're serious, that this actually means something. It's not all fake news. But that is absolutely strategically stupid. There is no point to it. Now, the funny thing about what you just said is absolutely the most logical and sensible analysis of what this guy did regarding, Britain first, and hey, it's anti-Muslim in some way. I'm good with that, because the guy is anti-Muslim. He keeps having to say he's not, but he's not for them because he thinks they're dangerous animals. Bottom line.
I don't know. I've never heard him say that, Chuck. I've never actually heard him say that.
But they're dangerous. Muslims are dangerous. They hate us. Islam hates us. I don't know why they hate us. He did say these things. So it's like they are dangerous. They are dangerous. Fine. I will remove the word animal. That's me being hyperbolic, sure. But the idea that he believes that Muslims in general are dangerous and Britain first, absolutely. Britain should put Britain first. He said this about other foreign nations. China should put China first. Russia should put Russia first. And his thinking is that simplistic. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you only read those words, that he's not correct. What do you want the British to do? Think about us? I wouldn't be if I was over there. I would first say, look, we need to clean up our own house before we worry about what's going on over there in the colonies. I mean, for God's sake. And the same thing stands for us. Why are we not handling our own business long before we're getting involved in any of this other nonsense? Well, I realize the Twitter account, and everybody goes, what's a Twitter account? Why are you even bothering to cover it? Well, as far as I know, released by the White House press secretary, these are official presidential pronouncements that come out on Twitter. So, yes, I'm taking them seriously. I shouldn't take the puppet government seriously at all. But since it's there,
What's funny, Chuck, is that you're restricted to less than a complete sentence on Twitter. So the fact that it's come down to the president expressing himself in less than a sentence, is that a good or a bad thing? But I just think, the whole thing with that is absolutely incredibly funny, because it's kind of just like a gaffe. He doesn't know it's a far-right group. He goes, yeah, that's great. Britain first, America first. Yeah. That's what I said when I came into office. I said I was going to put America first. Britain should put Britain first. That's what I was saying.
Yep. Oh, no, exactly. I mean, and it's perfect. But meanwhile, okay, you know what? Let's dispose of all this, because this is really the circus part of bread and circus, my friend. And you and I both know this. Let's get down to some of the real stuff, and I'm sure you've been covering it over at Windows on the World. And quite honestly, I have been so busy with everything, I haven't been over there. So I want to hear what you've been covering, what you've been talking about regarding, not just Mr. Corbyn, and not just, probably some of these other groups that are, having fun and games over there. But in the past few weeks, and I know you had a couple of days where you weren't feeling well, but that doesn't stop you. In the past couple of weeks, what have you been covering over there? Let's talk about that.
Well, we did a show about kind of psychic attack and sort of interdimensional stuff. There's the study of the paranormal. And I mentioned an interview which I thought was absolutely fascinating by an American psychiatrist called Jerry Marzinski. Now, I didn't even know his full name. I just knew him as Dr. J from an interview that he did on YouTube called Demons Are Real. And it was about schizophrenia. And Jerry has spent all of his adult life, basically, working as a psychiatrist in mental institutions with psychiatric patients, mainly schizophrenics, and then in huge state establishments and huge prisons with people who are very, very dangerously psychotic. And he has found from his experience that these voices that people get, schizophrenia, is actually some form of possession. And he's worked out a way that people can get rid of the voices. And he works with a lady called Sherry Sweeney, who also contacted me. And she suffered from schizophrenia. She'd been abused as a child. She's had a terrible childhood. And she wrote a program called That's a Lie. And what it is, very simply, is that when the voices come to these people, she says, you have to say, that's a lie. You're lying to me. That's a lie. And it's incredibly interesting. So that's something we're going to be doing this Sunday. We're going to be talking to Jerry. But, yeah, we did that show, and it was basically on things that we touched on before. And D. Scott Roggo, who wrote this book, The Infinite Boundary, he was a parapsychologist, and he was murdered. And his murder was solved by a psychic it was really, really interesting and fascinating to get back into this, because you're right. The bread and circuses is a bit boring after a while. And another thing that we've been covering is fake activists. Now, that's the thing we've been covering on your show, but I've just seen something in front of me which...
Well, hang on, because you know what? We do that a lot on here, but before you move on to the fake activists, I want to talk to you about this other subject, because I tuned in for part of that. I forgot until you mentioned it. I actually tuned in for part of that, and I was listening, and I got to tell you, it's amazing to me how it is that people discount, when it comes to discussing mental illness. People are immediately put off by it. It's like, well, there are those that are crazy and there are those that aren't, and that's that. And what we should do with crazy people is put them away, and doesn't matter what they do to them, pump them full of drugs, do anything to keep them calm and keep them away. But the truth is, there's a lot more to this. And the fact that you brought up that particular portion is very hopeful. And you know why? The whole "that's a lie" concept that she's selling there, as simple as that sounds, as strange as that might, and maybe new agey to some people.
Well, it's not new agey. I assure you of that. It's not new agey because it's not built on any abstract concept. It's built on reality.
It's built very solidly on the same principles that the military uses, that any organization uses, quite honestly, to program someone. Now, everybody goes, wait a minute, he's talking about nefarious things. No, I'm not. You can, ready for this one, program yourself. You can decide how your mind works by conditioning that you implement. That is something that a lot of people don't say, right? And that to me is a strong thing. No, I want you to talk about that a little bit, but I just want to get that point very clear to people, because we kind of went by it real quick, and I don't want to let it go. You can condition yourself, and that means that you can recondition yourself. You can break any conditioning, any dogmatic implementation that has been granted to you by indoctrination can be removed. Guess who can do it? You can yourself. Now, there are responsible ways to handle this, and I don't necessarily sign on to everybody's program who does this, because not everybody's on the level. But the fact is, the things that allow people to recondition themselves are extremely important, Mark, and I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, yes, I wouldn't even call it reprogramming, Chuck, and I'll tell you why. Because I've known a few people who've developed this very enigmatic illness, this schizophrenia, and it's very disturbing. It degrades the host. In other words, the voices actually destroy the person, but the person gets to depend and becomes dependent and gets to, in the end, enjoy their own destruction, because they start to miss the voices if they go. And this is a thing that Jerry Marzinski was saying, which I found so fascinating. And to cut to the chase, he proved, well, to himself anyway, that these conditions are not just within the person. He had a prisoner who was in a state prison, and he was called because this guy had gone psychotic, and the guards couldn't control him. He said before this happened, he'd seen him walk up the stairs. He could barely drag his body up the stairs, and he threw guards around the room. And he couldn't believe it. It was superhuman strength. And he came face to face with this man, and this man's eyes were black. And around this man, there was an electrical field building up, and it actually shot up the wall, and he could hear it. And it was crackling all around him. And he then knew that these, whatever they are, entities, can manifest things in reality. And that was such a profound thing that it completely changed his view of psychiatry and what this thing was about. And I've been fascinated with it for years, because I know people who've become possessed, had entities attached to them, and these things are incredibly strong. If you get a strong one, they will destroy the person, or attempt to destroy the person who knows about it. In other words, they can read thoughts. And this is the really interesting thing, that they seem to be able to remember things that even the host has forgotten and rub their faces in it. And he also reports of a story, a fellow who worked in finance. He was very, very rich, and he'd been using a lot of cocaine, and he started hearing voices, and he hid this from his wife. He was deteriorating rapidly. She ended up kicking him out, and he ended up on the streets eating out of dustbins, and he rather enjoyed it. And Jerry managed to cure him. He managed to make the voices go away. So the fellow went back to his normal daily life, and then sometime later, he sees the fella on the streets. And he said, "What happened?" He said, "The voices came back." He said, "Well, didn't you tell them to go?" He goes, "No, I missed them." Very, very interesting and profound, this stuff, you know.
Well, there are some that would argue that all of it is merely a manifestation, a splintering manifestation of the singular consciousness, right?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean anything, Chuck. That actually doesn't mean anything, because consciousness is just awareness. Now, that awareness is just a field. It's a field of energy, and that field of energy can be intruded upon. I spent some time doing exercises with a group called the International Academy of Consciousness to protect you from psychic attack. And when we say psychic attack, this can be just intention from other people. If there's malevolent intention, then that will manifest against you. You will be, people know when they're being stared at, for instance. This sort of stuff, this is very basic, but on another level, I think this is the real bigger picture, because what's happening to us, we are being dealt with on a demonic level with black magic. Everything we've been talking about tonight is subversion and black magic. And that's what we're up against. So I feel that is the bigger picture, because everything in our lives is about us consenting to it. We have to consent. And as Yuri Bezmenov, the Soviet defector, said, the population have to be willing hosts of subversion. So we're talking about the same thing. It doesn't matter whether it's someone's demonically possessed or a country is being ruined by communist subversives and taken over. It's the same thing. It's a parasite eating the host. That's all it is.
Well, and I have actually studied various forms of, well, what we'll generously call witchcraft. I've studied various forms of it. I've studied and practiced some of it. And quite honestly, this is one of the things that I think people fail to understand, is that the consent of the person that is being targeted in one way or another, whether it be for the positive or the negative, whether it be for, for whatever purpose, quite honestly, this plays a huge role. Okay, the idea that they must actually willingly accept something one way or another. This is a huge thing when it comes to the real, and I don't mean the fake sort of new world new age sort of magic they tell you about. Here's your spell and write this down, and and then say it to the sky and then it'll happen kind of thing that they show you on YouTube in a lot of cases. I'm talking about the real stuff. Okay, the consent of the individual has to be acquired. Sometimes it's done, of course, through subversive subterfuge. And you get them to consent to something that they don't realize they're consenting to under the guise of accepting something else. Very much like the legend of the vampire, they can't quite get all the way into your life until you invite them into your home. There's a reason why that legend is built the way it is, Mark. And these are very real things. Now, the idea that a mass population can be attacked in exactly the same way that a singular individual can be attacked is entirely accurate. I mean, I have no argument with what you're saying. What I was going to get into is the idea that psychiatry, in the academic sense at this point, has limited itself. It doesn't even really speak to its true nature. What is the psi part of psyche, part of psychiatry? It is the spirit. It is the study of the spirit. It is the study of that energy. It's not a matter of just thought. Thought is merely a byproduct, okay, of those energies interacting. And I think people fail to recognize that. Your friend who was a psychiatrist there, or your subject you were interviewing, I should say, who was a psychiatrist, is finally realizing that he was only ever told half the story.
Well, I think he learned that very quickly, right? To be fair, Chuck. He learned that when he was at psychiatry school. he was very concerned about what he was being taught. Now, we regularly talk to a group called Speak Out Against Psychiatry, and there's a young lad there who's basically very angry because he was given drugs that have chemically castrated him, and they've actually retarded him. And this is what they do. That's what psychiatry has never cured anybody. There is no cure. All this they do is carry on diagnosing symptoms. And the psychiatric handbook, the DSM, I think it's called, adds new illnesses to it every year. Of course, we had this sort of authoritative disorder. So, in other words, if you questioned authority, that was a disorder. Now, this is all going into this brave new world which we're in, which is total unreality. But yes, the actual approach to this, when it's thought about, and what people like Jerry Marzinski are saying, seems to work, and also seems to be actually what's going on, because this kind of thing has always gone on. And in the Middle Ages, or the so-called Dark Ages, it was accepted that demonic possession did exist. And when you actually look into it and do some research into it, and not just give blasé answers like the press do, and not research anything, then you will come up with these ideas. And yes, that was the entree into that show we were doing. It was called The Infinite Boundary, a book by D. Scott Roggo. And it's about spirit possession, madness, and multiple personality. And there's some fascinating case studies in there which go into great depth, and they look for facts, provable facts. For instance, there's an artist in there and called Swain Gifford, and he's quite well known. And when he died, someone who met him very briefly started painting Swain Gifford's paintings, and he became obsessed with them. And he didn't even enjoy it, but he became quite successful. And then he found out that he was actually painting and finishing Swain Gifford's unfinished paintings. It's quite a fascinating story.
Right. I mean, there. In other words, there is still a whole lot more that the academics do not seem to recognize that's actually happening. And I think once we unlock that legitimately, and I don't mean delving into it in this very superficial way that some people have, but I mean, in reality, if we dig into this and get at the actual root of it, we may find that our ancestors had a better handle on it than we do at this moment. This is something that is part of my daily routine in my mind, actually, is always remember your ancestors, as unenlightened as they might have seemed to have been. They may have actually known quite a bit more than we ever give them credit for. So moving on from that, though, I think about the subversion, and you want to get into the fake activism thing. You know, to
well,
me,
not necessarily. We can go anywhere you want with it, really, Chuck. But a lot of things come down to that.
Well,
but
to me, this walks hand in hand, though, Mark, because you know what? Fake activism is the fruition of driving people's sentimentality, right, into a direction, again, by deceiving them into backing something. I mean, I've talked to you several times about how I can't stand when people say, well, this is liberal, and therefore this is all part of this agenda over here, when they've lumped together the legitimate empathetic desires of somebody, like the idea that maybe you don't want to see all homeless people, you know, put to death. Well, gee, you must be a liberal, you know, this kind of thing. It's like they often fling these things all into one pot and try to rub the legitimacy of people that have, you know, like you were talking about, the old legitimate left. Well, there's a very spiritual aspect to this, where they're turning people against really their own desires. They've actually warped the language. They've warped the different phrases and words that are being used in order to label people. People identify themselves under these banners that they don't truly understand. Not only are they mischaracterizing their enemies, they're mischaracterizing themselves in a lot of these movements and things that are being put out there, which are really meant to keep us distracted on one level. But on another level, I see it as a more nefarious way to misdirect people's legitimate desires to see something good done. And I think that walks hand in hand with what we were talking about regarding how it is, listen, they have to have your consent, but they don't necessarily have to be honest about getting your consent in some of these cases. And I think that's part of what's happening when it comes to the fake activists. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I want to read you something. This is from the Torch Antifa website. Get this. This is complete 1984 doublespeak. It's called Creating a Culture of Tolerance. To create a culture of tolerance, we must first eliminate all forms of hate speech. Now, that just means anything that they don't agree with, right? Every idea critical of our movement or are misogynist, etc. We have the facts and history on our side. Well, they have neither of those. And then it states, when all else fails, compare someone to Hitler. Every once in a while, one of our minority group friends will become disillusioned and speak out as a conservative, aka fascist. Well, that's again slightly contradictory to say the least. And it carries on. Belittle them as delusional. They speak against their own rational self-interest. Our colour, my blackness, for example, comes first. Identity politics, you see. It's about identifying yourself first with a cause and secondly as a human being. So the cause, with all this fake activism, has to come first. Because, in other words, there's nothing behind the cause. There is no cause. So the cause cannot be integrated into the person's experience because there is no cause. That's all it is. It's absolutely fascinating. And if you look at the Saul Alinsky stuff, he stated, in the beginning, the organizer's first job is to create the issues or problems. So in other words, it's not like the old-fashioned left reacting to injustice. They're saying whatever we call you is the cause. So if we call you a fascist, you're a fascist. And you've got to prove you're not. Well, it's quite easy to prove that you're not a fascist when they call you a fascist because they don't know what a fascist is, but they don't usually give you that long. They go into the Saul Alinsky rules, which is they'll start asking you other questions. And it's all very interesting in the respect that I'm part of a charity. I decided to help a friend of mine who's got a charity, and they run a venue where they put on lots of different acts. They have people up there doing still life painting. They have a reggae night on a Sunday. They have a Romanian wedding upstairs. They're the actual epitome of what these fascist groups like Antifa or anti-fascist, whatever we want to call them, would call diverse. But
hang on, wait a second. Wait a second.
Want to attack us. Yeah.
Well, what's weird to me, but I want to stop you there because I'm having trouble wrapping my mind around this because, see, if you were actually a left-thinking person, even in the modern sense, where is the problem with, so reggae is certainly not a white privilege thing. I know that. It's not the music of white privilege.
But also, they're all West Indians, so that chucks that one out of the window as well.
Well, I'm just saying, even if it was white guys doing that music, fine, but okay, West Indian guys, sure, whatever, but it doesn't matter. I'm saying just let's deal with the art itself. The music is not of, the music of white privilege. It just isn't. The idea that there's a Romanian thing going on.
Because the borough where this is underprivileged white people. It's white people with no privilege. But it's a centre where everyone can go. And that charity has been libelled today on a fake news website. And there's a group that have turned up, and they're saying that they are the charity. And get this, Chuck, we have to prove that they're not the charity when we're the charity, and we're on the Charity Commission website, and we're registered as the charity, but they're saying they're us. It's absolutely insane. And once you get to that level with it, the people involved in this charity, the lady who was running the building and getting all these people together locally and keeping everyone happy and giving everyone a cheap night out, she's being attacked. And she couldn't understand it. It's absolutely driven her crazy. And then I sent her this video with Saul Alinsky's rules on and the explanation of how it's being implemented. And she goes, oh, my God, that's what they're doing to me. And she just got it in one.
Well, but it's totally bizarre because it's not only resulted in that where the left, the alleged left, see, this is why I can't call it the left, is literally working against the principles that are supposed to be left, okay? But on top of it, even, okay, let's talk about white people for a minute because they're one of my favorite subjects. Why not? Yeah, I wish I could show you the look on my face. The thing is that when it comes to white people, here's the amazing thing. I see white people turning against themselves, where they not only vote for, but they vocally support things that are destructive to them as a group without even giving any sort of, weight to who they are as an individual. Forget it. Because they're part of this white class, even though they don't have any money, they don't have any power, they don't have any privilege, because that's what the majority of white people are in this country, are not actually the powered and privileged people. Okay.
Well, exactly, Chuck. And the last person that used that white privilege on me bitterly regretted it, because I destroyed every single aspect of what they were saying. And I asked them, how dare they say that I was privileged? I've never been privileged. I've been underprivileged. Now, what the whole idea of these Soros-backed groups is to empower people that aren't even groups. It's identity politics first. That's why we have this LBGT agenda. This is why we've got 3-year-old kids now being told that they don't know whether they're boys or girls. Now, 5 years ago, we didn't have that. This is all new. We've got Thomas the Tank Engine being diverse, vibrant, LBGT. And this is this children's cartoon that's about 30 years old that was narrated by Ringo Starr about this old engine.
My God, wait a minute. Thomas the Tank Engine.
Yeah,
look,
yeah.
I'm familiar with that here. Mr. Topham Hatt is on that sucker. George Carlin used to do some of the narration for it in America. I remember Ringo Starr was also a conductor. But, Thomas the Tank Engine, first of all, I mean, outside of the fact that his name is Thomas and they call him he, you would have no idea that he's male anyway because he's a tank engine with a face on him. That's it.
I don't know whether you know about this.
Oh, my goodness.
This is the headline. This is the headline, Chuck. I think I wanted to read this out last time and we didn't get to it. Get this. Okay. United Nations called to make Thomas the Tank Engine gender neutral. Fans are furious. Thomas the Tank Engine is being overhauled to become more gender balanced. It revealed yesterday. A row erupted after it emerged the United Nations had been called in to advise how to update the image of Thomas and Friends, the children's TV favourite. The changes by US toy maker Mattel, which owns the show, will mean the end of Henry and Edward, two of Thomas's friends who appeared in the original books by the Reverend Wilbert Audrey. They are being replaced in the Tidmouth sheds by two female engines, including Nia, the first African engine, developed with the help of the UN. So, I mean, this is incredible. We've got these steam engines now being given a seat at the UN to promote Agenda 2030, the enslavement of the whole planet, and it's going out to 3- and 4-year-old kids.
Okay, see, I have a 3-year-old, so my head is hurting. You mean to tell me that they had to make an African engine? So what you're telling me is one of the engines is now black, and I don't mean the color black, like they painted it black, and therefore, because one of them was green, one of them was Thomas is blue. One of his good friends I know was green. I don't think anybody had a race on the show. The race wasn't an issue here.
No, again, it's identity politics, Chuck. It's identity politics. It's making race an issue. Race wasn't an issue. You're right. It wouldn't have mattered what colour they were. It had nothing to do with race or gender. The kids don't see that. They just see a cartoon face, right? So you're making kids get into identity politics, but worse than that. I mean, this Owen Richards wrote, the books already have a moral, as you would expect, written by a vicar. You don't need to consult the UN over kids' TV. Now, he's completely missed the point because he doesn't understand what they're doing, that the Common Core education and the Agenda 2030 principles, no child will be left behind, means that every kid is going to get programmed into this global world government agenda and basically be completely dumbed down and controlled by the time they're 10 years old. So kids need to start rebelling.
Well, I'm sorry. You know what? I'm hearing what you're saying, but I'm still stuck on why is it that there's – because, listen, the Tales of Thomas the Tank Engine, I'm being objective here for a minute. I've watched them a few times. I've raised kids in a couple of different generations now because I've got adult kids, right? I've seen Thomas a lot. And Thomas generally teaches, like, decent lessons. If you're lazy and you don't take care of things, things go wrong. If you don't watch out for your friends and be nice to people, they won't be nice to you. General sort of common sense lessons are generally taught in the Thomas the Tank. I see it as very positive. It's not a negative thing, right? I mean, this is just me. Maybe I'm wrong, Mark. You can correct me, but race was not part of this. Gender was not part of this. National origin wasn't part. I mean, yes, people had English accents.
Well,
but as
I think the point is, Chuck, Agenda 21 and the principles of global enslavement through the UN and the United Nations Development Goals were not really mentioned in Thomas the Tank Engine, were they?
Not at all. And as I said, George Carlin, so it wasn't even like everybody was even British. George Carlin was one of the conductors. Yes. I know that sounds weird, but George Carlin didn't curse or do anything on there. He was just an actor who happened to be there and was kind of, like a friendly sort of guy being Mr. Conductor. And outside of that, I don't get why that needs to be injected. Oh, wait a minute. That's right, Mark. It needs to be injected into everything, doesn't it? Even if it doesn't belong there, because this is what the real agenda is. It's not about actually stopping people from doing things that are morally reprehensible and preying upon someone based on who they are, okay? Because that's not what it's about. No, not at all. It's about completely mangling the entire scene so that nobody has any idea what's actually happening, and everybody is sitting there rooting for the identity which has been granted them by this agenda in general. Unless I missed something, Mark, is that not the whole point here?
Yes, and the other point is, Chuck, is that the whole thing is that it says in support of United Nations Development Goals, and that's part of the newspaper headline. Now, most adults don't know what the United Nations Development Goals are. Most adults who are being affected by this and these draconian measures that we've been reporting on for years, and so have many other good people out there, people like Gary Arnold in the US and freedom advocates, all of these people, G. Edward Griffin and many others have been reporting this stuff to a select few who actually listen to them. Now, when you get this being pushed into 3-year-old kids and the adults don't know why it's being programmed into the kids or why the UN are involved, now that is very sinister.
I used to, Mark, we're almost out of time, but, I used to kind of laugh at some of the things that David Icke said years ago. I got to be honest with you. The idea that, there were actually reptilians that were in charge of things. But after a while, when you listen to all this and you really break it down and you think about how insidious and nefarious all of this really is, that's the only explanation that makes sense, because human beings are literally defeating themselves by attaching themselves to this type of crap.
It's a small few who are on a gravy train assisting those that do wish to enslave us all. The problem, it's the useful idiots, Chuck. And unfortunately, there's a lot of them. And talking of idiots, I'd like to wrap up with this. We have a singer over here. I'll use that term loosely. She's called Lily Allen. Her father, Keith Allen, was a comedian and actor. And he made a very good documentary about the death of Princess Diana, actually, which everyone should see. Mm-hmm. That's a side issue. Now, this shows you we're living in a post-truth world. Lily Allen, his daughter, it says here, Lily Allen's lodgers have branded her stupid for moaning she would have nowhere to live at Christmas, as a removal van was pictured outside her flat today. Now, get this. These people that she's renting half of her house out to, remember she's got several properties and this one's worth nearly $2 million. Well, she's rented it out to some very wealthy diplomats. And they've said to her, the removal van's not coming till Tuesday. Can we leave our stuff here till Tuesday? So she's thrown a wobbly and gone on Twitter and said, I've got people in my house who won't leave and they're claiming diplomatic immunity.
Wow.
Can you get this?
Okay.
It kind of leaves you speechless, doesn't it? She said, I'm meant to be moving back into my flat this week, but my tenants just dropped that they can't find anywhere to go up to their standards. Then they said they're diplomats and have diplomatic immunity. Now, they never said that, right? They said, can we leave our stuff here for a couple of days?
Well, you know what? I guess it's just one of those things where those who actually control the truth, right, are the people in charge. And it's very difficult to actually understand what the truth is, because the truth, by definition, no longer really exists. We are truly in the post-truth era, I think, Mark. And, of course, you can find out about this and many other things at windowsontheworld.net. That is Mark's home website, and we broadcast through there as well. His show now broadcasts through Chelli.com when it's live on Sundays. I forget the time exactly, Mark. What time does it run there on Sundays?
9 to 11 p.m. GMT.
9 to 11 p.m. GMT, which means it's somewhere in the middle of the day. Figure it out over here in the USA. But you definitely want to catch Mark Windows when he does his show. And I certainly endorse a lot of the work that he does. Nobody agrees with me 100%, not at all. So I'll tell you that I don't necessarily endorse 100% of what Mark says. But for the most part, I know this. We are on the same side, okay, of reality here. And we are absolutely looking to make things better. So, Mark Windows, I appreciate you giving me the time here on a Wednesday, my friend. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Chuck. That was great.
Windows on the World live every Sunday, 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Join me, Mark Windows.